Okay. Attempting to do all of and take that back. We're not attempting. We'll do 1 Samuel. We're obviously not going to read through the entire book. We're going to hit the highlights, so to speak. But in order to do so, let's divide it up. If you read your brief introduction to the first book of Samuel, it talks about the early source and the late source. Right? The early source, as it discusses, written probably during the reign of Solomon. I've expanded it a little bit. Davidic, Solomonic, that is during the period of David or during the period of Solomon, 9th, 10th century BC. And it really, what characterizes the early source according to your editors? What do they celebrate? It emphasizes the monarchy. That is, the monarchy from the early source's point of view is a good thing. Okay? Why? Because it's emphasizing David's monarchy. It's not emphasizing Saul's monarchy. Okay? The late source kind of takes the more judge's point of view of the monarchy. That the monarchy is a bad thing. Why? Because the people called for it, and they called for it because they turned away from God. In your introduction, talked about how these two sources are kind of interwoven throughout the book. Now, bear in mind, all that is supposition. All that is theory based upon what the book actually says. Okay? It's not the case that someone has discovered, a biblical scholar has discovered the quote-unquote early source or the quote-unquote late source. They're making that argument. Whoever first came up with this idea, and I don't know who came up with it, and your editors don't mention it, and one of the other works I was looking at last night doesn't mention who first came up with this idea. But they come up with this idea because there seems to be a shift in theme at various points, okay, throughout the book. Almost like there's two editorial or authorial voices at work. And then somebody, your editors don't give a description of this per se, but somebody later, post-exile, that is, after the Jews come back to Israel from their Babylonian captivity in the 5th, 6th century, somebody later on takes all of that material and works it into the final form that it's more or less in now. Right? So I'm not going to say much more about that other than at various points, we'll kind of discuss, okay, so at this point, what does it sound like the author's attitude is towards the king or the kingship, etc., etc. Okay? Now let's look at it from another way, kind of an outline way. Well, Samuel can kind of be divided. Notice there's a lot of overlap, obviously. First 4 chapters, for the most part, are about Eli, okay, who's called the priest of the Lord, though there's no temple per se, there's no tabernacle, there is the ark, but it's about Eli. And it's during the middle of Eli's priesthood that we see Samuel conceived, born, donated to, or given to, offered to God, etc., was raised by Eli and such. Okay? And that begins, again, depending upon where you want to take Samuel's beginning, chapter 2 is where his mother prays to God and God allows her to give birth. But it's chapter 4, really, where Samuel comes into his own as a priest with the death of Eli. So, if you want to go back to his very early youth, chapter 2, more when he becomes priest on his own, chapter 4, 2, almost the end of the book. But the book's named after him. In fact, the next book is named after him. He's dead. He's dead before the next book even opens. Why? Because the assumed author is Samuel. Now, obviously, he can't be the author of the second book because he died before any of those events happened. So why is it 2 Samuel? Well, your introduction also says what? Both books were originally one book. In the Hebrew version, they are one long book. In the Greek Septuagint, it gets broken into two. So one long book taken as Samuel's, but again, he still doesn't complete the second half. So then Saul is introduced. Why is Saul introduced? Because early on in Samuel's reign, as we'll see, we'll talk about this, the people start clamoring for a king. Okay? God says, fine, let them, they want a king, I'll give them a king. Samuel thinks it's their rejection of him. We'll look at that passage. So Saul is introduced, and Saul stays through the rest of the book. Okay? Early on, after Saul is introduced, fairly early on, we get David introduced. In fact, we're going to see David introduced twice. Two different introductions, and they're literally introductions. The second one reads as though David's never been mentioned before, and yet he has been mentioned. In fact, the second one reads as though Saul never knew David, had never heard of David, had no idea there was a David. And yet he's already been introduced to Saul earlier, less than a chapter earlier. Okay? So, first 4 chapters, we're not going to say much of, other than early in the first chapter, we get introduced to, sorry, this is part of this cold or whatever. My brain is just fried. We get introduced to Eli at the very beginning. Okay? He's got a couple of wives, Peninnah and Hannah. The one, Peninnah, however you pronounce her name, she's got lots of kids. Hannah doesn't have any. Hannah prays, and we see Eli sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple, verse 9 and following, and Hannah is praying. Now we're told she's praying silently. She's not uttering this vocally, but her lips are moving. And Eli looks at her and he thinks she's drunk. Okay? She says, no, I'm not drunk. I've prayed to the Lord, etc., etc. And Eli answers, verse 17, go in peace, the God of Israel grant your petition, etc., etc. Okay? Sorry, Eli's not Hannah's wife. It's Elkanah, who is her husband. So, she gets pregnant. She has a child. She delivers the child. Chapter 2. She then offers this hymn of praise and thanksgiving. It's a song. It's poetry. Okay? The rest of the book, for the most part, is not. It's prose. So, when in the Old Testament, and even in the New Testament, we'll see several examples of this, you have something that gets rendered in verse or in poetry. What is one of the reasons for doing that? Verse and poetry have meter. They have rhyme. What is one reason for doing that? Is it just to make it poetic? Is it just to make it literary? It's not, actually. It's memorization. It's easier to remember something if you have a kind of a rhyme and a rhythm to it. Okay? So, this is designed, as was Moses' song at the end of his life, and the Song of Deborah that we saw in Judges. They're all designed to be what? Recited later on. To be memorized and sung. That is, they encapsulate, they incorporate a whole bunch of information, a whole bunch of important ideas and themes in short, pithy, lyric form. So, hers begins, my heart exults in the Lord, my strength is exalted in the Lord, my mouth derides my enemies, because I rejoice in thy salvation. And you've got a footnote that mentions there's another song later in the Christian Bible, okay, that follows this almost exactly. Luke 1, make sure it's 1, Luke, don't see a big 2, nope. Luke 1, verses 46 and following. Mary's Magnificat, what's called the Magnificat, okay? So keep a finger on page 332 and look at Hannah's prayer / hymn first. My heart exalts in the Lord, my strength is exalted in the Lord, my mouth derides my enemies because I rejoice in thy salvation. There is none holy like the Lord, there is none besides thee, there is no rock like our God. Talk no more so very proudly. Let not arrogance come from your mouth, for the Lord is a God of knowledge, by him actions are weighed. The bows of the mighty are broken, the feeble gird on strength. So you get this idea, the mighty are going to be turned down, the poor are going to be exalted, the weak are going to be lifted up, the humble are going to be raised, etc., etc. Okay? Now look at Mary's, page 1242.
What was the chapter again?
Luke 1, verses 47 or 46 through 55. Okay? And we'll look at this again when we get to the New Testament. My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior, for he has regarded the low estate of his handmaiden. My heart exults in the Lord, though my soul magnifies the Lord. So the one by Hannah, she exults, she is alive, she is full of joy in God. And Mary says, my soul magnifies, that is, enlarges, makes great. Well, if you take Mary's words and what is described as happened to Mary, literally, how else does her soul magnify the Lord? Well, she gives birth to Christ, who is what? The Lord. Okay? She goes on. For behold, henceforth all generations will call me blessed. Hannah doesn't say anything like that. Why? Hannah's not giving birth to a Savior. For he who is mighty has done great things for me. Holy is his name. His mercy is on those who fear him from generation to generation, etc., etc. So here we have an example of an Old Testament thing that gets kind of picked up and remodeled in the New Testament. Okay? So Hannah finishes her prayer and such. Pick up with chapter 2, verse 26. Now the boy Samuel continued to grow both in stature and in favor with the Lord and with men. Eerily similar to Luke chapter 2, verse 52. Okay, so we've had one parallel already between Mary and Hannah, 2:52. And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. Notice, Samuel is being raised for what? For what purpose?
Be a prophet.
He's going to be a prophet. What else is he going to be? A priest. What's Christ going to be? A priest, the priest, according to Christian theology, and the prophet, the final forthteller, so to speak, of God, at least according to what Hebrews says. I think we have Hebrews on the text. Okay? So, the man of God comes to Eli, says to him, I revealed myself to the house of your father when they were in Egypt, such a blah, 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 blah. Okay? So, Samuel grows up, chapter 3, not quite, and Eli's getting old now. And notice his eyesight begins to grow dim. That means two things. It means literally, he doesn't see as well, but it also means metaphorically, he's drawing near to death. Often in the Old Testament and in other ancient literature, like ancient Greek poetry, when someone's about to die or in the process of dying, we hear that their eyes go dark, or a shadow falls upon them. Okay? Same kind of thing here. So Eli's getting ready to die. Not he himself is preparing for it. It's just he's getting old and his time is wearing thin. Samuel's lying down in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was. This isn't the temple, because that doesn't get built until Solomon. This is just the building where the ark is. Okay? And Eli goes to sleep, and Samuel's lying down there, and he hears a voice. Notice, chapter 3, verse 4. The Lord called, Samuel, Samuel. Here I am. And he runs to Eli, because he thinks it's Eli calling. Eli says, I didn't call you. Go lie down. So he goes. He lies down again. And the Lord calls again. Samuel. He runs to Eli. Here I am. You called. I did not call you. Lay down. Okay. Verse 7. Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord. What does that mean? He did not yet know the Lord. It's not, the biblical, no, it's not carnal knowledge, so to speak. It's what?
They didn't have a relationship.
Bingo. He didn't have a personal experience. A lot of these prophets have what kind of experience? Personal. An angel of the Lord comes to the prophet, and the person realizes this isn't just an ordinary person. Okay? He did not yet know the Lord. And the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. That is, he had not yet received kind of the prophetic inspiration. And the Lord calls to him a third time. And he rose and goes to Eli, says, here I am, for you called me. And Eli finally, maybe because Eli's tired. Maybe we don't know, is this all happening in one night? Is it happening 3 successive nights? We're not specifically said. But Eli's now picking up on what's happening. And he tells him, go lie down. And if notice, the he isn't said who. But if he calls again, say, speak, Lord. Notice the Lord is that lowercase that small cap Lord. That's an example. That's one of those instances where the text shows that. But in the original Hebrew, it's got the YHWH, the name of God, which Jews don't say. So, say God's name. So Eli is now telling Samuel, God's trying to get your attention. So if you hear that voice again, say, speak, God, for thy servant hears. Look at verse 10. Notice it changes the quote-unquote formula. The formula before had been God called, God called, God called. Now it's what? Call can mean what? Samuel. Now, we're told, and the Lord came and stood forth. Now, he's standing right in front of Samuel. Samuel's asleep. Calling as at other times. But now he's standing in front of him. And Samuel said, speak, for thy servant hears. The Lord said to Samuel, I'm about to do a thing in Israel at which the 2 ears of everyone that hears it will tingle. In other words, I'm going to blow their socks off. They're not going to be prepared for this. Okay? What is that thing? I'm going to fulfill against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house. What has he said against Eli's house? What about Eli's 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas? Are they good sons of the priest? No. Are they good priests themselves? No. So, God's going to bring essentially judgment to them. So, Samuel goes back to sleep. And the next morning, Eli says, so what did he say? What did God have to tell you? Don't keep any secrets from me. May God do to you and more also if you hide anything from me. That is, what God said he's going to do, might he do it to you if you don't tell me all the truth. So Samuel's like, sorry. And he tells him, Eli, it is the Lord. Let him do what seems good to him. That's a long, fancy way of saying what? So be it. Let it be. Why? He is the Lord. What's Eli kind of acknowledging here? Who am I? I get what I deserve. And Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and let none of his words fall to the ground. What does that mean? Samuel grew, the Lord was with him, and let none of his words fall to the ground. Does that mean Samuel let none of God's words fall to the ground? That is, remain useless, not be fulfilled? It might. It might mean God didn't let any of Samuel's words as his prophet remain useless or unheard. Okay? Beginning of chapter 4. Actually, it's just finish that. So 19 and following. 3:19 and following. And all Israel from Dan to Beersheba knew that Samuel was established as a prophet of the Lord. And the Lord appeared again at Shiloh, for the Lord revealed himself to Samuel at Shiloh by the word of the Lord. And the word of Samuel came to all Israel. So the Lord appears to Samuel. His word comes to Samuel. Samuel reveals that word to people. And the word comes to all Israel. We get the description of the prophet here. He's merely a conduit, a mouthpiece. Right? But notice, the Lord appeared, 21, again at Shiloh. Why again? Is it because he appeared there yesterday? No. Where's God, quote unquote, been? Absent. See, they're kind of, what's going on? What happened to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Okay? So, Israel goes out to battle, and the Ark of the Covenant comes in. The Philistines are all afraid. They're wondering what's going to happen. Chapter 11 and following, the Ark is captured, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, are slain. Okay? Verse 15, Eli's now 98 years old, so there's a reason why his vision's going dim. Okay? And Eli asks, how'd it go with my sons in the battle? He's told, and what happens? He falls over and dies. He essentially breaks his neck. Okay? Chapter 5. So, the Philistines take the Ark of God and they put it inside the temple of their god Dagon. Okay? This is the same Dagon that we heard the Philistines are celebrating back in Judges when Samson dies. Samson's brought into the house, arms are put up against, he pushes off the columns, the place collapses. Same God. And what happens? So they put the ark next to the god Dagon. And when the people of Ashdod rose early the next morning, behold, Dagon had fallen face downward on the ground, before the ark of the Lord. Now, before might simply mean in front of. Like maybe they've got Dagon here facing this direction, and the ark here facing this direction, and Dagon falls down. Could be Dagon's here, the ark is here, and Dagon falls down this way, so that the image of it, is facing, but it's facing away from the ark. Could also mean Dagon has fallen face down like this, in front of the ark, like God. Okay? It's not exactly clear how that before means. So, they pick it up, put it back, and it happens again. And the head of Dagon, both his hands were lying cut upon the threshold, only the trunk. So, the head's severed, the arms and legs are severed from the god. And you just get the trunk. Kind of implying, thou shalt have no other gods before me, blah, 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 blah. Okay? So, because the ark is there, because Dagon's been destroyed, the physical god, the Philistines are like, what do we do with this thing? What do we do with this ark? So they take it out of Ashdod and they take it to Ekron, another Philistine city. Why? We don't want to have it with us. You guys take it, okay? And they say, nope, we don't want to keep it here. Send it back to Israel. So it's in the country of the Philistines for 7 months. We're going to skip a bunch again. And what does God do? God visits the Philistines with plagues and diseases. Okay? So the Philistines return the ark to Israel. Go to chapter 7. So the men of Kiriath Jearim come, they take up the ark of the Lord, they brought it to the house of Abinadab, consecrate his son Eleazar to have charge of the ark of the Lord. And Samuel says, verse 3, notice Samuel now is already what? He's acknowledged as the prophet. Okay? If you are returning to the Lord with all your heart, notice that big conditional if, then put away the foreign gods and the Ashtaroth from among you. The Ashtaroth means the plural of Ashtoreth. Okay? And direct your heart to the Lord, serve him only, he will deliver you out of the Philistines. So Israel put away the Baals and Ashtaroth. That is, the local fertility gods. So they've got the ark back. Now they agree, we're going to do this. Okay? So Israel says, gather all together, and they do. Oh, I should have mentioned. So they gather all together, and we're told, verse 15, Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life. How did Eli's portion end at the end of chapter 4? And Eli judged Israel 40 years. Indicating what?
He wasn't the judge when he died.
Okay, possibly. The book reads like a continuation of Judges. All throughout the book of Judges, you have, and so died and ruled X number of Y years. Okay? Eli ruled 40 years, and then he died. And then we get Samuel. And now, in Samuel, judged Israel again. It's the same kind of language. It's not, here's a different story. This is a continuation of Judges. Judged Israel all the days of his life. This is one of the passages that your editors say, comes from a late source. It's continuing that Deuteronomic history idea that you disobey God, you get punished, and then hopefully what happens? You repent, God blesses you, rinse and repeat. So, he went on a circuit year by year to Bethel, Gilgal, and Mizpah. Circuit means he rode or walked from one place to another place, and there he judged. That is, the people brought their problems to him. Just like back in Exodus, Moses judged. Okay? And Moses set up judges for all the people. So, every year he goes to these 3 places, 3 key towns of Israel. And then he'd go back to his own home, and that's where he also administered justice. And he built an altar to the Lord. Chapter 8, Samuel suddenly becomes old. In other words, this goes on for a long time, where Samuel does this every year. And he has children, and his children do what? They do like Eli's sons did. His sons did not walk in his ways, but turned aside after gain, money. They want money. They took bribes and perverted justice. Notice, they're not prophets. Okay? But we are kind of told they are judges because they're the son of a judge. And how do they judge? They don't judge like Samuel does. Objectively. They're like, give me some cash and I'll find you innocent. So the elders come together and they say to Samuel, you are old and your sons do not walk in your ways. What do they mean you are old?
Too old to rule.
Too old to rule, too old to judge. Keep going. You're about to die, and your sons aren't good judges. What are they building towards? Now appoint for us a king to govern us like all the nations. All the nations surrounding us have a king. Why don't we? What do they not understand?
Lord's their king.
God's their king. Okay? Notice, they don't want a theocracy. They don't want God to be king. They want to be like everybody else. Give us a king to govern us. And Samuel prays. And the Lord says, listen to them. In all that they say to you. Hearken doesn't mean only listen. It's acquiesce. Do what they want. Why? They've not rejected you. It's not you they're rejecting. Who are they rejecting? Me. Well, it's kind of hard for Samuel to accept that, right? Why? Because he's the one physically, personally there. But notice what God is saying through Samuel. You are my representative. By rejecting you, they reject me. Okay? Well, jump to the New Testament for a moment. Christ says, if you reject me, you reject him who sent me. Pretty strong parallel. Okay? So, God goes on talking to Samuel. According to all the deeds which they have done to me from the day I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day, forsaking me, serving other gods, so they are also doing to you. That's God's kind of way of telling Samuel, patting him on the back, metaphorically, and going, it's okay, Samuel. Look how long they have rejected me. Hundreds of years. You've not even been around 100. They're rejecting you just like they did me. Now then, hearken to their voice, only you shall solemnly warn them. So, you're going to give them a king, but you're going to tell them what kind of king they're going to get. So Samuel speaks to the people. Says, you want a king? You sure? You really want a king? Because this is what you're going to get. And look at verses 11 through 18. What does he say about having a king? They think having a king is wonderful because that king will do what? What are they thinking of when they think of king?
Like someone to lead them into battle.
Someone to lead them into battle, aka a protector, a leader, a commander. But largely, above that leader and commander, protector. No, this is what your king will do. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots. He will appoint for himself commanders of thousands, commanders of 50s, some to plow his ground. That is kind of like his own personal servants. Some to reap his harvest, make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his servants. You can kind of understand, just occurred to me, maybe why in the Middle Ages and the early period of the Renaissance, some kings, like Henry VIII, did not want this book translated into the common language. Because everyday ordinary Slavs like me, if they picked that up and read that, they'd go, damn, that sounds a lot like Henry VIII. Taking my land, taking my people, taking my goods, because that's exactly what he did. He will take the tenth of your grain and of your vineyards and give it to his officers and his servants. Notice, he will take the tenth. That's what? That's a tithe. The tithe is supposed to go to God. He's going to take a tenth and do what? He's going to distribute it to who? The people who serve him. For what purpose? To bind those people to him. Is this really what you want? And in that day you will cry out because of a king whom you have chosen for yourselves. But the Lord won't answer. This is what you're asking. And they say, we will have a king, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may govern us and go out before us and fight our battles. What are they forgetting about God? Who fought their battles against the Egyptians? Pillar of cloud by day, pillar of fire by night, the whole. But that was what? It was a long time ago. It's not happening now, right? Where has the ark been just before this? For 7 months. It's been with the Philistines, their enemies. Where was God then? Why didn't God, Raiders of the Lost Ark, zap out of the, ark and kill everybody? So Samuel says, and he goes and he repeats to God what he hears. Hearken to their voice and make them a king. So Samuel tells everybody to go back home. But notice, God doesn't just leave it totally up to Samuel. He doesn't say, okay, Samuel, draw lots. He doesn't say, Samuel, go throughout all the people and just go, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, you're the best king, so you got to go, and choose one. No. Look at chapter 9. There was a man at Benjamin. And we get introduced to Saul. Describe Saul. He was handsome, big guy. From the shoulders and above, he was taller than everybody else. That implies all the other Israelites only came up to his shoulder. Okay? So he's a big dude. Had a son, Kish had a son named Saul. A handsome young man. There was not a man among the people of Israel more handsome than he. From his shoulders upward, he was taller than any of the people. Okay? And so Kish loses his donkeys, his asses, and he sends out Saul and others to look for him. So Saul goes out, and they go off to seek the man of God. Why? He's a seer. He's a seer. That is, he can see things others can't. He's going to him and say, can you see my dad's asses? Can you tell me where they are? Verse 15, chapter 9. Now, the day before Saul came, that is, the day before Saul comes to Samuel, God speaks to Samuel and says, tomorrow, I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin. You shall anoint him to be prince over my people. He shall save my people from the hand of the Philistines, for I have seen the affliction of my people, because their cries come to me. Samuel sees Saul, and it's like there's a tap on his shoulder. That's him. Saul goes to Samuel, asks, where's the house of the seer? He says, I'm he. Chapter 10. So he goes into the house of Samuel, and Samuel takes a vial of oil, pours it on his head, kisses him, and says, has not the Lord anointed you to be prince over his people Israel? By anointing him, he's making him the Messiah, the chosen one. Messiah simply means the anointed one. So he anoints him with oil. You shall reign over the people of the Lord. You will save them from the hand of their enemies round about. This shall be the sign to you that the Lord has anointed you. What shall be the sign? There are several things. This is going to happen. This is going to happen. And this is going to happen. Okay? So, 10:2. When you leave me today, you're going to meet two men by Rachel's tomb. And they're going to say to you, okay? Then you're going to go on further from there, and you're going to meet three men going up to God at Bethel. And something's going to happen to you there. Then, verse 6, the Spirit of the Lord will come mightily upon you, and you shall prophesy with them and be turned into another man. Doesn't mean literally Saul becomes Ahab. It means you will be like renewed, reborn. Now, when these signs meet you, do whatever your hand finds to do, for God is with you. That is, when these three things happen in each point, do whatever you want. Why? Because God's with you. Okay? Then after 7 days, come back. I will come to you and show you what you shall do. So, when he turned his back to leave, verse 9, when he turned his back to leave Samuel, God gave him another heart. You've got a gloss down there somewhere if I can find it. God gave him another heart. That is, made a new man of him. We're going to see in a few days, several days, when we get to the Psalms, David is going to pray for a new heart. Make a new heart in me, oh God. Why? Because David is saying, I screwed up mightily. And I've got to change. And I can't change on my own. Only you can. So, God does this to Samuel. To Saul. Verse 17 and following. So God calls all the people again together to the Lord and says, I delivered you from it. So he reiterates old history, but you rejected God and you want a king. So bring up yourselves, bring up your peoples by your tribes and by your thousands. So all the 12 tribes come together. And they go through, and tribe of Benjamin is polled by lot. So 12 tribes, 12 slips of paper, essentially. Benjamin comes out. The names of Benjaminites come out, okay? And the family of the Matrites is called. Family of the Matrites comes near, and Saul the son of Kish, but Saul's not there. Why? He's already been anointed. He's already the king. This is just kind of the pro forma celebration or ceremony. Is it that Saul doesn't want to be king? Why is he hiding among the baggage? Baggage, probably the baggage of all the people who've had to leave their homes and come to this place. God says, psst, he's over there. So they get him, and Samuel says, here's the Lord's chosen. And all the people shout, long live the king. 25. So Samuel tells the people the rights and duties of the kingship. And he writes them in a book. Why does he write them in a book? So they won't forget. It's easy to forget. You write it down, it's a lot harder. Of course, you can lose the book. Okay? So, let's see here. Let's skip that. Chapter 12. Yeah, we can skip. Chapter 12. So Saul calls to all Israel again and says, I've listened to you. I've made a king. King walks before you. I'm old and gray. My sons are with you. Bear in mind, what are Samuel's sons like? They're corrupt. And I've walked with you, before you from my youth until this day. Here I am, testify against me before the Lord and before his anointed. Whose ox have I taken, or whose ass have I taken? Whom have I defrauded? Whom have I oppressed? Or from whose hand have I taken a bribe to blind my eyes with it? That is, Samuel's saying this about himself. So I'm getting ready to die. I need you guys to tell me, what have I done wrong or bad? They say, you've not done anything. And so he says to them, verse 5, chapter 12, verse 5. The Lord is witness against you and is anointed as witness this day that you have not found anything in my hand. And they said, yep, God is our witness. So Samuel keeps speaking. He says, you're right, God is our witness. Who appointed Moses and Aaron and blah, 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 blah. He talks about Jacob. He talks about Jacob going into Egypt. He talks about the Egyptians, etc., etc. He talks about what happened in the book of Judges. He mentions Sisera. Okay. He mentions the Ashtaroth, Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and Barak, and Jephthah, and Samuel. So he's just put himself in line with what? All these heroes of the past. Why? You guys said I was blameless against you. Well, Gideon was blameless for the Israelites. Moses was blameless for them. Jacob was blameless. All these others were blameless. And the Lord sent, bottom of page 345, verse 11. The Lord sent Jerubbaal and Barak and Jephthah and Samuel, delivered you out of the hand of your enemies on every side. You dwelt in safety. And then he goes on. Okay? What's he getting to? He's going to reiterate those commands. Those conditional commands. That is, the commands aren't conditional. But if you do these things, then God will bless you. That's the condition. So, verse 14. Actually, verse 13. Now behold the king whom you have chosen, for whom you have asked. Behold, the Lord has set a king over you. If you will fear the Lord and serve him, hearken to his voice, and not rebel against the commandments of the Lord, and if both you and the king who reigns over you will follow the Lord your God, it will be well. This is a big passage of this linked source. The linked source emphasizes this conditional relationship. If you listen to the Lord your God and do what he says and follow him and walk in his commands, then blah, 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 blah. Okay? 15. But if you will not, then the hand of the Lord will be against you and your king, against you and your king. Okay? Notice, God does turn against Saul when Saul errs, when Saul sins. God doesn't turn against David when Saul sins. He punishes David, yes, but he doesn't turn against him. Now, therefore, stand still, see this great thing which the Lord will do before your eyes. What's this great thing? And why is he saying God will do this great thing? What's the purpose of it? It's so that they can know what I'm telling you is the truth. Okay? You don't believe me? Watch. Here's a sign that what I'm saying is true. He says, it's harvest time today, right? And your footnote tells you wheat harvest time was in early summer. No rainstorms in the land of Palestine. Just not in the summer. Dry as dust. And they're all like, yeah, it's wheat time and there's no rain and thunder. And he says, watch. And it thundered and rained. Now, pretty much, unless that was just really lucky coincidence, most people take that to be God's with him and what he's just told us is the truth. So, if we obey, blessing and happiness. If we disobey, crap. Verse 19. And all the people said to Samuel, pray for your servants to the Lord your God, that we may not die, for we have added to all our sins this evil to ask for ourselves a king. You pray to God for us. Why? Because we have screwed up mightily. They've asked for a king. They've gotten a king. What's the implication? They can't ask God to take it back. No, we don't want any king anymore. We want God to be our king. And Samuel says, you have done this evil, but don't turn aside from following the Lord. But serve the Lord with all your heart. Do not turn aside after vain things, which cannot profit or save, for they are vain. The Lord will not cast away his people for his great name's sake, because it has pleased the Lord to make a people for himself. The Lord will not cast away his people. Notice, that's not conditional. What's Samuel saying? As we will hear, well, if you read all of the Old Testament, you'll hear. I don't know that we'll hear the exact spots. The Lord will always do what? Keep a remnant. There will always be at least a small portion that God will preserve. So, verse 24. Only fear the Lord, serve him faithfully, for consider what great things he's done for you, but if you still do wickedly, you shall be swept away, both you and your king. And then we got a messed up part. Samuel was some years old, and he reigned for 2 years, but he didn't reign. He reigned a lot longer than 2 years. Okay? Chapter 13. Samuel goes up against a rebel army at Michmash, however it's pronounced. And Samuel says to him, "You have done foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. For now the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel. Now your kingdom won't last." He sought out a man after his own heart. Okay? What was it Saul had actually done? He was supposed to kill everybody and everything, but he didn't. He kept the king alive, and the people took the best sheep and the best cattle, and they offered that to God as a sacrifice. God said, "I don't want the sacrifice." Okay? Go on to verse 14. There's another battle. That's chapter 14. Verses 24 and following. Saul lays an oath on the people. Okay, they fought all day. It's hot. They're tired. They're hungry. They're thirsty. And they go into this grove, and there's honey everywhere. And he says, "You can't eat it." Well, his son, Jonathan, hasn't heard. He goes in, he dips his staff in the honey, and he licks it. Well, the oath was, anyone who eats of anything today will die. Word is brought to Saul. Saul asks Jonathan what you did, and Jonathan explains. And Saul says, "Yep, you have to die." And the people come up and take Jonathan. They go, "No, you're not going to take Jonathan. He didn't know any better." Okay? Shall Jonathan, verse 45, chapter 14. The people said to Saul, "Shall Jonathan die, who has wrought this great victory in Israel? Far from it. As the Lord lives, not." Okay. Chapter 15. Samuel goes to Saul. "Lord sent me to anoint you king over his people. Now hearken to the words of the Lord. I will punish what Amalek did to Israel in opposing them." Okay. So, this is where Saul goes and allows Agag, king of the Amalekites, to live. And the people take all this stuff. And the word of the Lord comes to Samuel, verse 10, and says, "I shouldn't have done it. They've not performed my commandments." Saul comes to Samuel, and he's essentially asking for a blessing. And Samuel says, "Why? You disobeyed God." He's like, "We made this great sacrifice to him." Verse 18, "And the Lord sent you on a mission and said, go utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, fight against them until they are consumed." Okay, now, when the Lord commanded him to kill, what did he say? Verse 3, "Utterly destroy all that they have. Do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, infant, suckling, ox, sheep, camel, ass." Everything. Wipe them out. Saul doesn't. So God says, or Samuel says, "Why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord? Why did you swoop on the spoil, etc., etc.? And he says, "I have obeyed. I've gone on the mission which the Lord sent me. I brought Agag the king. I've utterly destroyed the Amalekites, but the people took the spoil, etc., etc., and we offered them as a sacrifice." And Samuel says in verse, in a poem. Why? He wants this to be memorized. "Does the Lord take great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as he does obedience?" Obedience. Notice, obedience is an action, right? It is. So is offering a sacrifice. But obedience is not a physical doing something like it was here, other than kill them all. Rebellion is the sin of divination. Why? What's divination? It's trying to figure out the future. Divination is trying to figure out the future. That's what rebellion is. Samuel is saying, by making this sacrifice, you're trying to buy God off. You're trying to figure out the future. Okay? So, Samuel goes to leave towards the end of chapter 15. And he says to Saul, verse 26, I will not return with you, for you have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you from being king over Israel. It's now the second or third time he's told him that. I anointed you, but God has rejected you, and he's going to raise up another king. And what does Saul do? He reaches out and grabs Samuel's cloak. Saul lays hold upon the skirt of his robe, and it tears. And Samuel takes that image of the tearing and says, the Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you, and he's given it to a neighbor of yours, someone better than you. And the glory of Israel will not lie or repent, for he is not a man, blah, 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 blah. Okay? So, chapter 16 and following, God speaks to Samuel and tells him where to go. Go to Bethlehem. Because that's where the new king is. Verse 6 and following. So Samuel goes, he meets Jesse, he starts meeting Jesse's sons. He meets the eldest son, Eliab, that says, this has got to be him. Big, strong, strapping young man. God says, nope. Do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. The Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. Well, we've already seen that, right? After all, how did Saul appear? Big, tall, etc. Turned out to be a failure. So they bring the next one. The Lord says, nope. And the next one, nope. And he goes through Jesse's 7 eldest sons. He goes, you got any more kids? Well, yeah, there's David. He's the puny one. The last one, he's out tending the flock. Call him. Now he was ready, verse 12, and had beautiful eyes and was handsome. In other words, looking as man sees, he's the full deal. He's just not big, strapping, tall, And the Lord said, this is him. So Samuel anoints him, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon David from that day forward. And the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul. Why? Can it not be in both places at once? Nope, but it's because God has chosen David. And what happens instead? The Spirit of the Lord leaves Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord tormented him. See, one thing in popular Christian mythology, let's say, maybe I shouldn't call it mythology, popular Christian belief, is that quote-unquote evil spirits, all that kind of stuff, they're all from Satan. Not according to the Bible. The Bible makes it very clear. They all answer to God. Every last one of them. So when one comes, like here, it's from the Lord. You're going to see multiple, if you read all of the Old Testament, you see multiple examples of, and an evil spirit was sent from God, etc. Okay? And Saul's servants say to him, an evil spirit from God is tormenting you. Command that someone who's skillful on the lyre be brought before you, so that when you're in one of these fits, you'll hear the music and it'll calm you down. Here's our first introduction to David. By that, I don't mean first introduction within the totality of the Old Testament. First introduction of David to Saul, right? Because we've already seen David. He's already been anointed by Samuel. So, one of the men says, there's a Bethlehemite. He's really good on the lyre. You should bring him in. So they go and they bring David. And David comes before Saul. Verse 19. Send me David your son who is with the sheep. Saul sends a messenger that says that. Jesse took an ass laden with bread, and they sent David. David comes to Saul. Verse 21. Enters his service, and Saul loved him greatly. He became his armor bearer. And Saul commands that David now live with him. That is, live in his house. Why? So that when Saul gets in a funky mood, David can pull out the lyre and sing to him and help ease his evil spirit. So that when David played, Saul was refreshed at the very end of chapter 16. and was well, and the evil spirit departed. So that's the first introduction. Okay? Chapter 17. One of the most famous stories of all of the Bible, David and Goliath. It actually doesn't begin at David and Goliath. It just begins Goliath. How big is Goliath?
10 feet.
His height is 6 cubits and a span. A cubit is 18 inches. It's roughly fingertip to elbow. It's roughly 18 inches. So that's 9 feet right there, 6 cubits. And a span is from here to here. Now, from here to here is not a foot. But we're probably thinking maybe by Goliath's measurement, which would make him even larger. So roughly 10 feet or so. Saw a little video on Facebook the other day. And it's some black kids playing basketball out in the middle of the street in Gainesville. And these cops come up because somebody called the cops because they were making noise. Idiots. And cop comes up, white cop, and he starts shooting balls with them. And he later, another point, he tells these kids, yeah, I'm going to bring backup, and we're going to play against you guys. And we're going to show you how to really play. And they're like, yeah. Well, the cop comes back later, and he goes, I got my backup. You guys sure you're ready for this? Have any of you seen this? And they go, come on, man. Out comes Shaq. Okay? If you've ever seen him, I can reach to about the top of Shaq's head. That's how big he is. He's walking around these people, and they all look like midgets compared to him. In fact, he goes around this one kid, and he accidentally moves a little too much, almost knocks the kid down and puts his arms like this to keep, when I say kid, the kid's like 17, and is not a small boy on his own, okay? Goliath's huge is the point. How huge? Well, we're told his coat of mail was the weight of 5,000 shekels of bronze. Your footnote tells you it's 150 pounds. I've put on a coat of mail before at the Tower of London. A replica coat of mail that would have been worn, like 1200 AD. It's about 60 pounds. So 150 pounds. That's pretty heavy. So he comes out and he challenges the ranks of Israel. And he does what? Single combat. You kill me, we will serve you. I kill you, Israel serves us, the Philistines. Okay? Verse 12. Now David was the son of an Ephrathite of Bethlehem in Judah named Jesse, who had 8 sons. And it's like he's suddenly reintroduced again. Okay? So, Jesse sends David to his brothers who were in Saul's army, and he hears Goliath. He hears Goliath challenge the Israelites. Okay? And David says, I'll fight him. And they take David to Saul. Verse 33. And Saul goes, you can't fight against him. You're just a youth. He's a man of war. David says, what? I can kill him. How do I know I can kill him? He gives 2 reasons. One, I killed a lion and a bear when they attacked our flock with my bare hands. Okay, that's pretty cool. Because David's only like 12, 13, 14 years old at this point. Okay? What else does he say? The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of the Philistines. It wasn't I who killed the bear and the lion. It was God who killed them through me. He will do the same thing. All right, go. And the Lord be with you. That's kind of like Saul's way of saying, all right, good luck, So David goes out there. He challenges Goliath. Goliath laughs at him. Because David's out there. He's got a sling and a stick. Ooh. He's armed all over. And David, as the story goes, as everybody in here already knows, hits him right in the forehead with a rock. Hits him so hard that the rock is embedded between his eyes. And David goes and chops his head off. And Saul says to him, verse 58 at the end of chapter 17, whose son are you? Well, if you go back to chapter 16, Saul sent a messenger to the house of Jesse and said, send me your son. Two different versions are at work here. Okay? So, we find out David goes essentially to live with him. Jonathan loves David, close friendship. Saul loves David. I mean, he kept Saul from having to fight Goliath. Okay? But what really irks Saul is what? Verse 7, chapter 18. The women sang to one another as they made merry. Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Now, obviously, that's exaggeration, right? Because who is David slain by this time? A lion, a bear, and Goliath. He hasn't gone off in military battles. And Saul was very angry, and this saying displeased him. Verse 9, and Saul eyed David from that day on. What's that mean, eyed? He kept a close watch. If he had had the CIA and the FBI and all the various alphabet soups in D.C., Saul would have had them all keeping an eye on David. And on the morrow, an evil spirit from God rushed upon Saul. He raved within his house while David was playing the lyre. Okay, so we already know, when does David play the lyre? When an evil spirit is on Saul. And now what does Saul do? He takes a spear and he thinks, I'm going to pin that sucker to the wall. But David evaded him twice. We're going to hear another example. Chapter 19, verse 9 and following. David's playing the lyre. Saul gets his spear. He tries to pin him again. So, and David evaded him twice might refer also to that event in chapter 19. Okay? So, David offers his daughter to Saul. Saul offers his daughter to David, Verses 17, chapter 18, verses 17 and following. David's like, I can't marry your daughter. Who am I to marry, the daughter of a king? And then the same thing is essentially said a little bit later on. Okay? So David starts killing Philistines, and Saul tells Jonathan, you can't trust David. He's going to take the kingship from you. He's going to replace you. Jonathan says, you shouldn't say such things, beginning chapter 19, verse 4 and following. Okay. Go on to chapter 20. David flees from Saul. Okay. Verse 18, chapter 19, David and Samuel fled from Saul to Ramah. Then chapter 20, David then flees from Naioth and Ramah and comes and says to Jonathan, what gives? That's what have I done me. What gives? Where's my guilt? Where's my sin? Why did your father try to kill me? And Jonathan says, he's not going to kill you, don't worry. My father does nothing either great or small without disclosing. In other words, I'll know if he's going to try and kill you. Okay? So, they come up with a plan. David's not going to go to dinner at Saul's house. Why? Because he's already tried to kill him twice, and he's like, I'm just going to stay away for a bit. But Saul's expecting him. So David doesn't show up. And the first night, Saul says nothing. But the second night, he says something. And Jonathan's, I forgot. There's a ceremony. His brothers want him there, so that's why he's there. And Saul's like, I'm going to chew the dirty little. So the plan they've agreed on is that Jonathan will go out and shoot an arrow, and he'll tell his servant, if it's safe for David to come back in, it's there. If it's not safe, the arrow's farther away. Okay? So he does, and David knows it's not safe to go there. I'm skipping a bunch. Let's see. Go to chapter 22. David escapes. Okay. And he goes to Ahimelech, the priest. He goes to Ahimelech, and somebody sees him. Okay. A guy named Doeg, the Edomite. And Doeg the Edomite goes to Saul, and he tells Saul where David is. So Saul sends troops to Ahimelech. Chapter 22, verses 16 and following. You shall surely die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's house. The king said to the guard, turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because their hand also was with David. They knew that he fled. They did not disclose it to me. In other words, the friend of my enemy is my enemy. You aided David. You should have told me. Therefore, you are going to die. But the servants of the king would not put forth their hand to fall upon the priest of the Lord. Why? Killing a priest of the Lord is like attempting to kill the Lord. So the king said to Doeg, and Doeg kills them all. And how many? 85 priests are killed that day. So Abiathar escapes. He tells David what happens. And David thinks it's my fault. Okay? So we get a series of passages, chapters really, where David is seeking Saul is seeking David. David is fleeing from Saul. Simultaneously, there are skirmishes between Saul and the Philistines and David and the Philistines. All right? Chapter 24. 10 minutes. So the Lord tells David, I will give Saul into your hand. And David's in a cave, and Saul comes in. Okay? And the men of David are with David in the cave, and there's Saul. And they go, now's our chance. Now we can kill him. But David doesn't. Saul goes to sleep, and David comes up, and he cuts the hem off Saul's robe. It says, Lord forbid that I should do this thing, to put forth my hand against him. So they leave. Okay? And afterwards, David and his men go out, and there's Saul. And David from outside, from a distance away, calls Saul. And Saul says, don't worry, I won't hurt you. See, my father, David says. David says that, I won't hurt you. Verse 11, see, my father, see the skirt of your robe in my hand, for by the fact that I cut off the skirt and did not kill you, you may know and see that there is no wrong or treason in my hands. I have not sinned against you. Saul keeps thinking what? David wants his job. David's out to kill him. David, holds us up and goes, I could have killed you. And Saul kind of begs forgiveness. Is this your voice, my son David? Verse 16 and following. You are more righteous than I, for you have repaid me good, whereas I repaid you evil. You have declared this day how you have dealt with me, in that you did not kill me. For if a man finds his enemy, will he let him go away safe? So may the Lord reward you with good for what you have done this day. And now I behold, surely you shall be king. Right? This is an early source. This is emphasizing David's righteousness. Okay? And Saul just asks one thing. Promise me, he says, very end of chapter 24. You will not destroy my name out of my father's house. You will not cut off my descendants after me. Well, David doesn't cut off his descendants after him. In fact, once David becomes king, what does he actually do? He sends word out and says, are there any living relatives of Saul? Because at the end of 1 Samuel, Saul dies, right? And two of his sons with him. Okay? And so David becomes king, and he's like, are there any living relatives or servants? And he finds there is a servant, and the servant says there is a son, the crippled son. Okay? We'll talk about that when we get to it. So, chapter 25, Samuel dies. And kind of all Israel comes out to the funeral. Okay? And we get, in that same chapter, the story of Nabal and Abigail. Nabal's just a sorry piece of work. He dies. David marries Abigail. David has several wives. Okay? Again, we have an opportunity in 26 where David can kill Saul. Okay? But he doesn't. He takes the thing of water that was by Saul and he takes Saul's spear. He goes out the next morning. He calls Saul and he goes, could have killed you. And Saul replies, just like he did in the previous chapter, verse 17 and following, is this your voice, my son? He says, it is my voice. Why does my Lord pursue? David said, why do you keep chasing me? If it is the Lord who stirred you up against me, may he accept an offering. But if it is men, that is, David says, if God has stirred you against me, maybe he will accept an offering I can give him. But if it's men, may they be cursed before the Lord, for they have driven me out this day, that I should have no share in the heritage of the Lord. Saul, I have done wrong. It's that judge's mentality again. I have done wrong, the Lord has gone against me, etc., etc. I have played the fool, and Saul finishes 26. Blessed be you, my son David, you will do many things and will succeed in them. David goes to his place, Saul goes to his place. Notice they're not the same place. All right? So David finally admits, because up until this point he hasn't really admitted it. I shall perish one day by the hand of Saul. Nothing better for me than I should escape to the land of the Philistines. Okay? So he does. He goes up. In chapter 28, Saul does something that really angers God. We're told after Samuel died, verse 3, chapter 28, verse 3, Saul had put the mediums and the wizards out of the land. We're told it's the early source, passage interrupts the sequence, blah, 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 blah. Okay? So what's meant by mediums and wizards? What's a medium do? Contacts the dead. You can go to a medium today. I don't know that you can in Murfreesboro. I'm sure you can. Nashville, you got it. Because there's all kinds of stuff in Nashville. Okay? Wizards? Can you find a wizard? I don't mean KKK Grand Wizard nonsense. I mean a wizard, a Gandalf walking around, an Albus Dumbledore. No, you can't. But this implies real, or they were real then. Now Saul put them all out of the land. Why? Because they go against all the Old Testament laws. And he asks, anybody know if there's anybody still around somewhere? And one of the guys says, there's a witch. Now your translation calls her a medium. King James is, there's a witch at Endor. Okay? So Saul disguises himself and he goes to her. He says, I want you to bring a spirit. Divine for me a spirit. Whomever. She's like, Saul said no. This is her way of testing. He says, don't worry, nothing's going to happen to you. She calls forth Samuel. Samuel's dead, right? His ghost, his shade, whatever it is, comes and speaks and like, why did you disturb my rest? And he says, here's what's going to happen. The Lord has done to you as he spoke by me, verse 17. For the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand, given it to your neighbor. Moreover, by this time tomorrow, you and your sons will be with me. That is dead. Okay? So, skip to the end of 31. Philistines are fighting against Saul. 3 minutes left. Saul is wounded. How wounded is he? The Philistines, verse 2, slew Jonathan and Abinadab and Malchishua, the sons of Saul. The battle pressed hard upon Saul. The archers found him. He was badly wounded by the archers. Saul said to his armor bearer, Draw your sword, thrust me through with it. Why? Lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and make sport of me. That is, kill me so that these Philistines don't take me and hack me to pieces. And armor bearer's like, I'm not going to do that. So, when his armor bearer saw, Saul falls on his sword and fell upon it. When his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he falls on his sword and dies with him. Now, later, we're going to be told that in 2 Samuel, that David is going to meet a guy from Egypt who's going to say, Saul's dead, I saw him, he had fallen on his sword, he wasn't quite dead. So I killed him. Why? To bring his death quickly. This was an act of mercy. And David has the guy killed. Why? Because he killed God's anointed. Saul was still anointed. He was still anointed. Okay, we'll stop there. 2 Samuel, which is much shorter, for Thursday, which takes us almost through all of David's life.